On the mist-laden slopes of Mount Zhongjun, a quiet February afternoon in 2011 took a terrifying turn. Two college students, out for a casual hike, were following a narrow trail when a foul odor permeated the crisp mountain air. At first, they assumed it was simply some inconsiderate litterer's trash after all. Carrying garbage halfway up a mountain only to leave it behind was not unusual in the mountainside's remote spots. But as they neared the source, they saw that the smell emanated from several large, black bags scattered among the bushes. Curiosity, quickly shifting to dread, compelled them to investigate. They approached, hesitated, and with shaking hands, opened the bags. Inside was a scene far more horrific than they could have imagined. The bags contained human body parts, dismembered and left in a scattered state. Trembling with fear and disgust, the students recoiled, barely able to process what they were seeing. Gathering their wits, they immediately called the police, who arrived swiftly to cordon off the area. The police worked methodically, securing the scene and surveying the surroundings. The mountainous terrain and recent rain made for a challenging investigation. Forensic experts meticulously inspected and cataloged each piece of evidence, counting 11 bags in total. Inside them, they eventually assembled the remains of a complete human body. The victim, they estimated, was a man between 40 and 50 years old, slightly overweight and notably muscular. His skull bore the unmistakable marks of a blunt force impact, suggesting a brutal and sudden end. Deep lacerations around the joints revealed that the killer had a practiced hand, likely someone familiar with anatomy or cutting techniques. This chilling discovery offered more than just a gruesome sight. It carried a unique set of clues. The careful dissection and placement of the body parts suggested that the crime had been committed by someone with an intricate knowledge of the human body, a doctor, perhaps, or a butcher. With no bloodstains or signs of struggle around the disposal site, it was clear that this mountain path had been a secondary location. The true crime scene, the investigators reasoned, was elsewhere. The victim's identity, however, remained a mystery. The face was unrecognizable, having been violently disfigured. The Nanjing police were quick to pursue every possible lead, scouring missing persons reports in hopes of finding a match, yet none came close to the body discovered on the mountainside. Each report was meticulously reviewed, but the results led nowhere. Only reports of missing children and elderly women surfaced, and those had either been resolved or led back to people with no connection to the case. As days turned into a week, the dead man's identity seemed to slip further out of reach. The investigation hit a major breakthrough during a second, more detailed examination. While forensic experts were analyzing the clothing remnants found on the body, one of them noticed an unusual detail in the victim's underwear. There, disguised as an ordinary label, was a small, carefully crafted pocket so well hidden it was nearly invisible. Within this hidden compartment, they found a crumpled piece of paper, soaked in blood and initially overlooked. The forensic team carefully extracted and examined the paper, soon realizing it was more than just a scrap. It was a fragment of a train ticket. Under the microscope, details of the ticket began to emerge. It bore the destination of a journey from Lanzhou to Nanjing and a date February 25, 2011. The revelation added a new layer of complexity to the investigation. With the real name registration system used in China for train tickets, the police were able to trace the ticket to its purchaser, one Tian Ming Cheng, a man whose details aligned with the description reconstructed from the remains. Finally, the police had what seemed to be the identity of the victim. Believing they were on the verge of solving the case, the police formed a task force and traveled to Lanzhou to notify Tian Ming Cheng's family. However, when they arrived, the investigation took an unexpected turn. At Yang's home, rather than finding a mourning widow, they were greeted by Tian Ming Cheng himself, alive and well, going about his daily routine. The man, bewildered by the officer's questions, confirmed that he had indeed purchased a train ticket to Nanjing. He explained that he'd traveled there to visit his second sister-in-law, Xu Liping, and his niece. His second brother, he explained, had died in a car accident 5 years prior, leaving his widow and child behind in Nanjing. Yang, who had maintained a close relationship with his sister-in-law and niece, often visited them. When asked about the ticket fragment found on the body, Yang was at a loss. He claimed to have disposed of the ticket himself, either tossing it out or leaving it somewhere where someone could have picked it up. The idea that it had somehow ended up in the secret pocket of a murdered man left both him and the police perplexed. Was the ticket a mere coincidence, or had the killer planted it intentionally, a deliberate attempt to mislead the investigation? Yang's alibi was meticulously verified, including surveillance footage from the hotel where he had stayed in Nanjing. Cameras captured his every move. He had spent the night of February 25th enjoying a bath and massage before heading to a local bar to watch soccer. He returned to his hotel in the early hours, only to fly back to Lanzhou the next day. Each detail checked out, effectively ruling him out as the killer. Yet the question lingered: how had his train ticket found its way to the victim? With this unexpected development, the case seemed to hit another dead end. But the forensic team persisted, scouring every remaining piece of evidence with renewed scrutiny. Among these were the plastic bags used to contain the dismembered body parts. Through analysis, they traced the bags back to a specific metro supermarket in the Jiangning district of Nanjing. The detectives painstakingly reviewed the store's surveillance footage, filtering through hours of video. Eventually, a significant lead surfaced on February 24th. A customer, a man in his 70s, was seen purchasing an unusual combination of items: garbage bags, a cleaver, and an axe. This shopper was identified as Zhu Jinggong, the father of Tian Ming Cheng's deceased brother's wife. This discovery raised troubling questions. Mr. Zhu was a well-known and respected businessman in Nanjing, the kind of man who had no apparent reason to buy tools often associated with violent crimes. The investigators were left wondering, could someone of his stature truly be involved in such a heinous act? Or was this another elaborate misdirection? At this stage, the evidence was circumstantial, not enough to warrant an arrest, but the detectives kept a watchful eye on Mr. Zhu. As more details of the Yang family's past emerged, they pointed toward a deeply entangled web of secrets. Tian Ming Cheng was the youngest of three brothers. His eldest brother, Tian Ming Cheng, had reportedly died in a car accident 5 years earlier, while his second brother, Tian Ming Wang, had left Nanjing after the accident and was believed to be living in Shenzhen. This left only Tian Ming Cheng, now haunted by the realization that his family's tangled history might be far darker than he had ever known. Intent on uncovering the truth, the police expanded their investigation into the Yang family, taking DNA samples from Yang and his relatives. The results left them staggered. The remains found on the mountainside did not belong to Tian Ming Cheng, as initially thought, but they did match someone in the Yang family. The victim, in fact, was the eldest brother, Tian Ming Cheng, the very man whose death had supposedly been recorded in a car accident 5 years ago. The shocking discovery opened the floodgates on a story of deception spanning years. As the details came to light, it became clear that Ming Cheng had faked his death to claim a massive insurance payout. After staging the accident, he had disappeared into obscurity, while his wife, Leping, continued her life in Nanjing, building a new life that included rekindling an old relationship with her former lover, Tang Kai. With Tang Kai's assistance, Leping's beauty salon business in Nanjing flourished, expanding into a chain of successful establishments. Her husband, meanwhile, remained in hiding, enduring a life of isolation and deprivation. Over time, resentment began to fester within him as he watched from afar, helplessly observing the life his wife seemed to thrive in without him. His sacrifice, he believed, had been for their future together, but as the years passed, the warmth and affection he had hoped for began to feel like a distant dream. Finally, after years of living in the shadows, Ming Cheng decided to return to Nanjing and reclaim his place in his family. When he arrived at Leping's apartment, his presence was nothing short of a shock. Leping, who had believed the matter long behind her, was faced with the man she thought she had forever left in her past. Her daughter, who had grown up believing her father was dead, was terrified at the sight of him. The shock quickly turned to panic as Leping realized the implications of her husband's return. Ming Cheng, however, seemed unaware of his wife's distress, convinced that he could seamlessly re-enter her life as though no time had passed. He believed that their love would transcend the years of deception and hardship, allowing them to pick up where they had left off. But Leping's shock wasn't born from surprise alone. As her estranged husband stood before her in tattered clothes, looking like a man who had just resurfaced from the depths, she realized that the secret they had so carefully buried could now unravel everything. For 3 years, she had quietly thrived, building a beauty salon empire in Nanjing with the assistance of her old flame, Tang Kai. Her widowhood had opened doors she had never imagined, and in her mind, the life she once shared with Ming Cheng had faded into a distant memory, a memory she had carefully edited out of her new life. Liping's attempts to remain calm crumbled as her daughter, who only knew her father through whispered stories, recoiled in terror at his appearance. For the girl, her dead father emerging from the shadows was nothing short of a ghost story come to life. Liping hurriedly sent her daughter to her parents' house, trying to avoid further confusion. She would need time to strategize her next move. Ming Cheng, meanwhile, was oblivious to the gravity of the situation. His only concern was his family, the family he had sacrificed so much for, and was determined to reclaim. Yet, as the days wore on, Liping grew colder and more distant, barely able to conceal the disdain she felt for the man she once loved. Ming Cheng was quick to notice her indifference. Initially, he brushed it off, telling himself that she was merely struggling to adjust. But soon, Liping's true emotions began to seep through, revealing a depth of contempt and disinterest that was impossible to ignore. At every turn, she reminded him of his status as an unwelcome ghost from a life she had left behind. Ming Cheng found himself banished to the cramped living room couch night after night, his attempts to share even the smallest semblance of intimacy met with excuses and outright rejections. Liping's resentment for him grew sharper with each passing day, especially as she thought of Tang Kai, the man she had come to rely on for companionship, stability, and even love. Realizing she had to act fast, Liping turned to her father, Mr. Xu, the very man who had enabled her to reinvent herself after her husband's supposed death. Wealthy and influential, he had his own reasons for wanting to avoid any further complications. The insurance fraud alone, if exposed, would drag his reputation and financial stability through the mud. Determined to shield his daughter from the consequences of her past, he began formulating a plan to rid himself and his daughter of Ming Cheng once and for all. In an attempt to placate Ming Cheng, Liping handed him a bank card loaded with 3 million yuan money she claimed was his portion of the insurance compensation. She urged him to leave, to take the money and start fresh somewhere far away. But Ming Cheng was not so easily bought off. He had endured years of hardship for this family, and now, faced with his wife's thinly veiled rejection and a bribe to disappear, he could no longer contain his anger. He lashed out at Liping, accusing her of betrayal, of abandoning him, just as he had come back to reclaim their life together. Liping, cornered by his rage, broke down in tears, but her desperation only fueled his fury. Defeated and humiliated, Ming Cheng took the money and left, but his heart seethed with resentment. He believed he had been tricked, discarded after years of sacrifice, and left to rot, while his wife enjoyed a life of luxury and love with another man. He began to plot his return, determined to win back what he saw as rightfully his. But the bitterness that festered within him drove him toward darker thoughts. When his pockets were eventually emptied, Ming Cheng turned to blackmail, calling Liping and demanding more money. Liping's life soon spiraled as she scrambled to meet his escalating demands. Her once prosperous beauty salon empire suffered as she funneled funds to appease her ex-husband, draining her accounts and pushing her father's business into a precarious financial position. Her resources dwindled, and with them, her patience. In desperation, she begged Ming Cheng to cease his demands, pleading for his understanding, but he was deaf to her appeals. He didn't want money anymore, he wanted revenge, to reclaim his family by force if necessary. In his twisted view, reuniting with his wife and child was his right, and he saw Tang Kai as the final obstacle standing between him and his fractured family. Ming Cheng confronted Tang Kai, attempting to drive a wedge between him and Liping. He recounted the insurance fraud, exposing the web of lies Liping had spun. But Tang Kai, loyal and committed, was unfazed. Instead of retreating, he stood by Liping, pledging to support her through whatever it would take to put Ming Cheng back in the shadows. Ming Cheng's resolve only grew stronger. In his desperation, he turned to his youngest brother, Tian Ming Cheng, for help. He returned to his family's village, recounting the story to his relatives, who were shocked to see him alive after all these years. He poured out his frustrations, spinning a tale of betrayal and hardship, painting himself as the victim of a cruel deception. Tian Ming Cheng, sympathetic to his brother's plight, offered to accompany him to Nanjing, hoping to act as a mediator in what had become a deeply fractured family conflict. In Nanjing, Ming Cheng and his brother arrived at Liping's apartment, hoping for reconciliation. But when Liping received the call from Tianming, warning her of their impending visit, she knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. She was at a loss for what to do, her thoughts spinning as she desperately tried to think of a way to avoid this confrontation. Unable to escape, she reached out to her father and Tang Kai, confiding in them that Ming Cheng was on his way. Together they agreed that this was the moment to act decisively. In her father's eyes, Ming Cheng was already dead. He reasoned that if Ming Cheng's return could not be prevented, he could still be made to disappear permanently this time. Mr. Xu, determined to protect his daughter and erase the threat to their new life, coordinated with Tang Kai to arrange Ming Cheng's abduction. On the evening of February 25th, as planned, the brothers arrived at Liping's residence, hoping for a heart-to-heart resolution. They argued late into the night, but with tensions high and no agreement reached, Tian Ming Cheng, feeling out of place in a situation that felt increasingly volatile, excused himself and returned to his hotel, leaving Ming Cheng alone. Minutes after Tianming's departure, Tang Kai and two accomplices stormed the apartment, overpowering Ming Cheng. They subdued him, tied him up, and transported him to Mr. Xu's villa, where they handed him over to Liping's father, now ready to carry out his own solution to the family's problems. Mr. Xu assured his daughter that she could return home, promising to take care of everything. As Ming Cheng came to, he found himself alone with his father-in-law, a man whose demeanor had shifted from affable to menacing. Realizing the severity of his predicament, Ming Cheng's thoughts raced, and he made one final, desperate attempt to ensure he would be identified if the worst were to happen. Under the guise of a bathroom break, he managed to slip the train ticket he had saved from his brother into the secret pocket of his underwear, hoping it might one day serve as a clue if he didn't survive the night. But Mr. Xu was resolute. Armed with an axe, he proceeded to carry out the grim task, his movements methodical and unyielding. Drawing on his knowledge of anatomy, he dismembered Ming Cheng's body with chilling precision, showing none of the hesitation one might expect from a man committing such an act. As the hours ticked by, Mr. Xu's grim resolve remained, even as the reality of his actions began to set in. By the time he had finished, the clock had already struck 2 a.m. Initially, Mr. Xu had intended to transport the body parts far from the villa, disposing of them in a remote location where they would never be found. But with dawn approaching and the need to cover his tracks growing urgent, he changed plans, opting instead to discard the dismembered remains on Mount Jiangjun, just a few hundred meters from his home. He packed the pieces into large, black bags, carefully concealing any identifying traces, and under the cover of night, made the journey to the secluded mountain path. Afterwards, in a final bid to cover his tracks and avoid suspicion, Mr. Xu took Ming Cheng's phone and sent a text message to Tian Ming Cheng, impersonating Ming Cheng and stating he had gone to Hanan and didn't want to be contacted. The ruse worked, at least initially. When the police first questioned Tian Ming Cheng, he withheld certain details, fearful that his involvement in his brother's recent return to Nanjing would cast suspicion on himself. He didn't want to believe that his eldest brother's tragic fate had come at the hands of his own family, and out of loyalty, he held back the full story. However, as the police investigation progressed, Tianming began to piece together the terrifying reality. The victim discovered on Mount Jiangjun was his own brother, Tian Ming Cheng, a fact that shattered him to his core. Stricken with guilt, he confessed everything, revealing the tangled web of deception, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder that had played out within his family. The police soon found ample evidence to support Tianming's confession. They examined Mr. Xu's villa and found traces of blood in the corners of the room where the crime had taken place. A further sweep of his car also revealed traces of Ming Cheng's blood. The crime scene now complete. It painted a hauntingly clear picture of the events that had transpired. Every detail pointed back to Mr. Xu, who had orchestrated the entire act under the guise of protecting his daughter. Following Tian Ming Cheng's full confession, the police were able to track down everyone involved. Liping was arrested just as she was making arrangements to flee to Japan, her panic and guilt evident as she tried to escape the consequences of her actions. Tang Kai, realizing there was no way out, turned himself in, admitting to his part in the kidnapping, but vehemently denying any involvement in the murder itself. As each player in this gruesome story fell into police custody, the full scope of the case finally became clear. In court, the prosecution painted a grim portrait of the family's twisted decisions and motives. They exposed the sordid details of the insurance fraud, the family's desperation to cover up past sins, and the brutal measures they had taken to ensure Ming Cheng remained dead. The court listened to every harrowing detail, and as the testimonies concluded, the evidence was so overwhelming that none could claim innocence. The final sentences were severe and absolute. In 2013, Mr. Xu was convicted of intentional homicide and received the death sentence with a 2-year reprieve, along with permanent deprivation of political rights. Liping, convicted as an accomplice to murder, initially received life imprisonment, though her sentence was later reduced to 15 years. Tang Kai, along with several others who had participated in the kidnapping, received various sentences, each reflecting their role in the crime. The trial marked the official end to a case that had left the community shaken and deeply disturbed. With the case closed, the story of Tian Ming Cheng and his ill-fated family drew to a final, tragic conclusion. The twists and turns, the motives driven by greed and desperation, and the betrayals buried under years of lies left a haunting impact on those who had followed the case from the start. What began as a calculated plan to escape hardship and build a better life had spiraled into a dark and deadly affair, revealing the lengths to which people will go when pushed to the brink. As the story fades into history, the case of Tian Ming Cheng remains a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and greed. It is a tale that forces us to confront the darker sides of human nature, how, in pursuit of gain, people can find themselves losing their very humanity. Yet at the same time, it serves as a testament to the power of truth and justice, showing that no matter how deeply buried, the truth will eventually rise to the surface, and those responsible will be held accountable. And with that, justice for Tian Ming Cheng was finally served, bringing an end to one of Nanjing's most chilling murder cases.